Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the workshop. I have a few introductory comments. I will, as I go along, talk about what worked, what didn't work. Let me go ahead and start off here. As I mentioned before, the goal here is to make it fun. Oftentimes, engineering science education can be a lot of suffering, right? There's a reason why MIT is often called hell. But this is not what we want to do with the girls. On the contrary, we want to give them a glimpse into this wonderful world of ideas and opportunities, and we do not want to we do not want to make them suffer. The other thing is we want to demystify it, meaning show them that it's not scary. Show them, in fact, that it's full of huge potential. Show them that it's accessible. We want to also show that relevance to everyday life, and we want to show them that this is not meant to be or our goal is not to make them computer scientists, but to give them access into a set of ideas that they could use regardless of what career path they go into. A great example is MIT's digital humanities, and if you think about history, it's nothing but data. However, most people don't think of a historian as a data scientist, but those are simply some analogies or metaphors that you can use. The other thing that I'll mention here at the outset is some observations from time being in the classroom. And as I mentioned in the workshop, I taught all of the sessions 9 to 5, Monday through Friday last year. And one of the things is that they're very visual. They love drawing on the board without me ever asking them to draw on the board. When I assigned them an exercise that they needed to complete, they would work together and they would start drawing on the board. These diagrams are available if anybody's interested, and it was really quite unique to see. The other thing is that they're highly social, and social in an unexpected way. Very soon after they come together, meaning a couple of minutes, even though they don't know each other, they're collaborating, they're working, and a lot of the social awkwardness that often exists when people don't know each other seems to almost disappear, right? So it is very different than your traditional engineering classroom for sure, where people sort of sit, stoically, quietly, don't really participate. So this is something that you can leverage and you can use while you're teaching. The other thing is they often stayed on the section of the class. Most of the classrooms that we had boards all around, whiteboards, and so they would create their work, they would do it in front of the board, and then they would present from there. And as opposed to them coming to the front of the class would come to them, as you can see here. The other thing is, let me see here if there are any additional points. The presentations were a lot of fun. They're not shy. They're quite comfortable, and I don't know if this is something to do with the makeup of the class or the way in which the class was delivered, but they're not reserved. They are quite outspoken. All of them participate, and as I mentioned there towards the end, they even have fun at times acting up the different roles and the solution they might have come up to the exercise. They're also a lot of fun. Let me go ahead and share a couple of videos here with you. Many times during the week, well, let me let me say this. Many times during the week, if you give them 5 minutes to decompress at one point or another, they have all these fun activities that they do, spontaneous, like for example, this game where they were clapping and turning cups. You can see here what they're doing. And so these are things that surprise me that I didn't even, realize. The other thing is they like to break into song. There's a lot of little songs that they know and that they'll break into. You can see here another one. So you can see there that as I mentioned, they are very fun. They have a very high level of energy. They love to engage. They love to participate. And all of these are things that you can take advantage of when you think about your activities, when you think about the topics of the day and how you're going to carry out exercises. The other thing as well is show, do not tell. And this is something that is often said regarding teaching. Demonstrate, connect. You shouldn't really speak for more than 5 minutes. That's a pretty long stretch. I did one lecture a couple of times on each of the sessions, meaning in each of the different groups that I work with. I saw it back on the evaluations. This part was way too long, and I thought, I was connecting, but still, don't stretch it out too long. Don't lecture. Do a lot of demos. They enjoy that. Regarding the structure of the workshop, the day was split into two parts. The morning would be no computers. That's often called computer science unplugged. And there are tables where we were. The chairs could move around, and so people could split into groups. Everything was done hands-on, though we did provide them pencil and paper. There were times at which they needed to perform some calculations, and so that was there for them. In general, we moved through a cycle that is the following. I would present the idea. I would tell them a little story. I would then demonstrate it. That was often fun because they had to figure out how I had done it, whether it was an algorithm or whether it was a trick or what technique I was using. Then they would practice it themselves. These are the things, again, that they could take away, that they could do at their home, and they would prove it back to us. Oftentimes, we had competition as well, where they could compete against each other. And then we would ask them to apply it to something of their own choosing. And here is really where they came alive. We saw great designs. We had great ideas. And they really showed their creativity, in addition to be able to prove the technique that they were trying to understand. And we would often give them prizes as well. This is simply a note to myself. A lot of the ideas of the workshop come from the course I run at MIT. The other thing is there's a set of materials that I'll mention as we go through the exercises that I've asked them to provide for every person that will be an instructor. And by the way, you will be in charge of your own classroom. You will have two TAs to support you. You will be leading the effort. You will be completely independent. The other thing I'll say as well is that you will not be micromanaged. Nobody will be looking over your shoulder. I expect everybody to do a fantastic job. You're all highly prepared, more than prepared than you need to be to do this. So enjoy that freedom and really leverage it to be able to bring your vision to this content. The other thing as well as I mentioned, you will all have this supporting material. We did not use it all because we didn't get through all of the exercises. You will see that in several days as the week goes on, I have way more material than you can cover. And the reason for that is to give you a few choices from what to select. And as I mentioned before, it is all about inspiration. And so depending on what you see working and how you are connecting, you could pivot and change things on the fly. So that's pretty much it about materials. When it comes to the schedule, we run 9 to 12 and then 1 through 4. The 9 through 12 block is when we do the unplugged part of the day. There are no computers, as I mentioned, in the classroom. We never touch a keyboard. Everything is done hands-on. It's algorithmic thinking, although we're not calling it that. Midway through the morning, you'll have snacks brought in. There is a whole organizational process that has taken place in Mexico. Sponsorship has brought in. All of that is being taken care of. But halfway through the morning, you'll see them start to set up while you're engaged in an exercise. And when you come to a good stopping point, then you can let them go out and have their snack. Lunch will also be served in the classroom when you get to a good stopping point. Again, it doesn't have to be right at 12. It could be a little bit before or a little bit after. Sometimes I ran into 12:30 or so, and then let them have their lunch. After that, you would change classrooms. You would go to a traditional computer lab where every single person has a computer. We are in different facilities. Most, I would say the majority would have the exact same setup. Others will have slight variations, but they will not be significant so that you cannot carry out the same model. You will then do coding exercises, and this is again computational thinking. The goal here is to give them some fundamentals, give them some insight, let them have some fun, see some powerful ideas, not to make them computer scientists in a week, and certainly not to master a language or a platform in a week. So then 3 to 4, there is a week-long project that runs in where we ask them to select a project that they want to present on Friday. The goal, or what we ask them to do, is to apply one of the ideas from the morning to a problem of their own choosing. Most of them chose Gale Shapley just because that is what we see in the very first morning, but they can really choose anything else. And the applications were across the board, from sports to how to select your next book to read. Some groups actually had working code on Friday. I'd say about half of them, others did not. But independent of that, the projects were way above our expectations and really, really great ideas from them. Last thing I'll mention before we move on to the actual days of the week is that Veronica and I are thinking through a number of exercises or activities through which we can start to measure some of the questions that we are preparing on the research side. One of them is an experiment that was run some time ago where several thousand people were asked to draw a scientist or engineer, and you can imagine what this came back as soon as as soon as I say it, you get the mental picture. And one of the ideas is to see if we get some change throughout the week. So, to do one of these at the very outset. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and move into the actual days. I'll go through the days of the week. I'll do first the morning. That's the part that requires more setup, more coordination. The afternoon is more straightforward. So the very first thing that we do is we create teams. So this is the very first activity. When they come in, they're sort of shy, although I mentioned that they're pretty lively. They don't know each other, so they sit in their chairs and they're sort of quiet, just waiting to see what's going to take place. The very first thing that we did was we numbered them 1 through 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then start over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we put the ones together, then the twos together, and so on. This is also an opportunity. The very first discussion is a discussion on patterns, so this is an opportunity to talk about patterns later on. The other thing to observe as well, as I mentioned earlier, is that if you think about the usual progression of a team, these are widely identified categories that a team moves through. As I mentioned, they go from 0 to collaborating and executing in about 3 minutes, right? So this is something quite unique. The other thing is, as we start off the project, as we start off the week-long workshop, introduce yourself. Most of them will not know what MIT is. Mexico is not a country that is keenly focused in science and engineering as some countries are around the world. So MIT is not a name that they would know. Share with them what you think it's fun, what you think will connect. Let them see you as a person that works on interesting ideas. Let them see you as a person. What is it that you like to do for fun? Again, that connection of them seeing you as not as this unattainable goal, but as someone who is not different than they are. We talked in the workshop about showing a video, and we decided that it is better to show it at the end of the week when we have the mentorship session, so they don't get, again, this distance from you. And so this should be short, and you should move through it pretty quickly. The next thing, and I just showed a picture of of my home to show them some of the things that that I showed with them, just to illustrate a point. So the other thing as well is then have them introduce themselves. ask them to give their name, why they're taking this class. Often the reason they give is because my dad told me to to take it. An interesting question would be as well is to know how many of them their mother signed them up. The other thing to note as well is don't ask them which part of their city they're from. This is a clear indication of your financial context, and this is pretty determining when it comes to where you would fit in the social hierarchy. So asking them, "Are you from the city we're in?" is okay, because sometimes they come from other cities. Last year I had from several parts of the country girls participating, but make sure you don't ask them what part of the city you're from, because you will have representation from the whole city. The other thing is ask them what their hobbies are. The most common one last year was dance. I would say over 50% of them were taking dance classes. Moving on, the workshop, the very first topic that we talk about, and this is the title. So in Spanish, the title is Patrones Hermosos, which means beautiful patterns. And so we start off with an in-depth discussion about what this is. The word patrones or patron, which is pattern, in Spanish also means boss. And so oftentimes, many of them will say, when you ask them what is a pattern, they will say boss. And pretty quickly you can start to get into most everything in life has a pattern. Mainstream society doesn't look at it as that, but from our vantage point, it is something that is quite natural for us to see. And so talk to them about, it could be cooking, it could be dance, it could be the way in which the groups were formed. Get them to connect and get them to try to understand perhaps that there are different components to this and that there are different patterns here at play. It's a fun discussion to have in a non-technical way. And so this is an opportunity for them to start to connect, to start to make these ideas come to life. The one that I talked about quite a bit was the restaurant as a computer, and this is something that is often done in introductory computer science classes, where you can see the cook as the CPU, you could see the box of recipes that he has as storage, you could see the waiters as messages flowing back and forth, you could see people having dinner as the ones performing an operation or sending an instruction. And so this is, again, just one more opportunity. Think about this, practice it yourself, and see what you want to have this discussion with the group on. And this is simply a picture here of them. They will be wearing, by the way, t-shirts, again, part of the sponsorship, with the name of the program and so on. Last year we gave them wristbands, unknown whether that will be provided, because I think that was one of the items that was very difficult to get in Mexico, but they will have some sort of reward. The very first activity that we did was Gail Shapley. This is one that, just as a point of context, originally I had written in the flyer how to find a boyfriend, and this proved to be very controversial. So if you look at the description of the site, I changed it to how to find a friend. But in the classroom, I actually talked about, boyfriends and girlfriends. And we talked about how do you maximize the happiness of a group. And this is an exercise that can be done in many different contexts. You could also do it as how to maximize the happiness of a group with the problem of, sitting next to the person that you most want to sit next to. And so you can see here that there is some setup. You have to provide the students with cards. And the exercise that I'll move through, I'll show you a video. Although before I show you the video, I'll say that I first asked them to solve this problem without any instruction, meaning just try to maximize the happiness of this group. I then gave them the instruction, and it is actually very straightforward. It is simply each of the queens, we did it with kings and queens and kings. Each of the queens specifies her choice, and her top choice is the one that she makes a proposal to. Then after that round is done, the kings select. Those that did not get selected go back out. That choice is removed, and then you do a number of iterations until you have a steady or a stable set of couplings. So let me go ahead and show you the video, and then I'll talk about the materials.
They called it the stable marriage problem. The stable marriage problem goes like this. Suppose you've got 4 women and 4 men, and they want to get married. Now, they've ranked each other according to their preferences. So, for example, the Queen of Hearts here, first choice is the King of Clubs. Second choice, King of Diamonds. And the last choice is the King of Hearts. So the challenge here is to play Cupid and pair up the kings and queens such that each one gets a partner, but more importantly, so that the marriages are stable.
A stable marriage means that the kings and queens don't necessarily get their first choice, but they get the best on offer.
For example, if I paired the King of Hearts and the Queen of Hearts, and the King of Spades and the Queen of Spades, this would be an unstable marriage. Because the King of Spades doesn't really like the Queen of Spades, he'd prefer the Queen of Hearts. The Queen of Hearts, in her turn, doesn't really like the King of Hearts. She'd prefer the King of Spades. So these two are going to run off together in this pairing.
Where there's a problem, there's an algorithm not far behind. In 1962, Gale and Shapley came up with their Nobel Prize-winning algorithm. A step-by-step recipe which always finds perfectly stable marriages.
So in the first round of the algorithm, the queens all propose their first choice kings. So the Queen of Spades' first choice is the King of Spades. She proposes to the King of Spades. The Queen of Hearts' first choice is the King of Clubs. So she proposes to the King of Clubs. Queen of Diamonds' first choice is the King of Spades. And the Queen of Clubs' first choice is also the King of Spades. So King of Spades seems to be the Darcy of this royal court. Now, the King of Spades has got 3 proposals. So he chooses his most popular queen, who is actually the Queen of Diamonds, and rejects the other 2. So we have 2 provisional engagements, 2 rejections.
We now remove the rejected queen's first choices, and it's time for round 2.
So the Queen of Spades is going to propose to the King of Diamonds. And the Queen of Clubs proposes to the King of Clubs. But now the King of Clubs has got 2 proposals, and actually they prefer the Queen of Clubs. So he rejects the Queen of Hearts, his provisional engagement on the first round of the algorithm. We have to start again.
In each round, the rejected queens propose to the next king on their list. And the kings always go for the best offer they get.
In this round of the algorithm, she proposes to the King of Hearts. And finally, everyone's paired up with a single queen and king, and all the marriages are stable.
The Gale-Shapley algorithm is now used all over the world. In Denmark to match children to daycare places. In Hungary to match students to schools. In New York to allocate rabbis to synagogues. And in China, Germany and Spain to match students to universities.
So to start off, we do not show them the video at any point. We just simply present the story. We tell them a little story about the pairings and so on. Then the teaching staff, your TAs, would provide the students with the big cards. We would ask them to set up a certain configuration, and we would also show them how to score. So that is, if a queen gets her first choice, she would get 4 points, and so on all the way down to 1 point. We can then add up the numbers and figure out who has maximized or gotten the highest configuration when it came to the group, and given the configuration that we started out with. So this is something that that worked pretty well, and let me go ahead and move through a set of slides that are meant to give you a reference on how to carry this out. So this is the explanation. Then we have the setup, and I would show this in the projector. Each of the teams then would get to put the cards together with the preferences, and you will have all the materials. So the cards, the double-sided sticky tape, and everything else would be available for you in the classroom, as well as pencil and paper, because this is an activity in where they did use it. Then you would go one of those cards or configurations at a time and preferences, and you would do it slowly and give everybody a chance to catch on, right? Once they start to work, they move from the desk to the floor. Again, nobody asked them to do that. This is just something they did. And they went on for quite a while. The other thing I will say as well is don't worry about time if what you're doing is working. There, you do not have to get through all of the material. If, for example, there is some activity that you wanted to do that didn't really fit into the day, just carry it on to the next day. Again, I've said it several times. The goal is for them to see the potential, to make a connection. All of us growing up, going through our education system, had that one moment when something really struck and there was that spark. That's what we're looking for. If every one of those girls has, a moment like that during that week, we've had a great success. So don't worry so much about covering every single concept. And as I mentioned, as you'll see as we get further into the week, there is much more content than you can actually cover. So the next step, we start off, we tell them what the problem is, we give them all the materials, we tell them what the preferences are. We do not tell them how they should do this. And so they go back and forth, they argue, and then most groups get there in the end. We then give them the actual algorithm, which, as you saw, is pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of going with the top choice, having that king in this case make a selection. Those that not get picked go for another cycle. And so you move through this. They see that there's a technique that works very well and that could give them the result without all of that uncertainty and all of those choices that can be overwhelming, and certainly as this grows. Then we ask them to apply this algorithm to something of their own choosing. Here is, as I've mentioned before, where they really come to life. They have great discussions. There were applications all the way from sports to how to minimize the number of or how to pair people in prison with lawyers, all kinds of really great, insightful, good applications of this algorithm to a problem from real life. So that is Monday between introductions, the activities at the beginning of class, lunch. You will be left with about an hour and a half. Moving through all of those activities will cover the time that you have left. So let's move into Tuesday. The very first thing that we do, and we do this every single morning, is we change the groups. And the reason we do that is that we want people to have an opportunity to work with other team members. The other thing as well is there are some teams that work better than others. And to make it fair throughout the week, we do that team creation. Last year we did it ourselves by hand. After the first day, we simply told them, this is your group, and we just called out the numbers. Group 1, here are the members. Group 2, here are the members, and so on. There's a bunch of different ways you could do this. I provide here a link on some strategies if you want to do, have some fun or provide something extra in that part. But otherwise, this is what we did every single morning. In the afternoon, it's different, but I'll come back to that later when I talk about the afternoons. I started out the day by doing an activity, and this is a card trick. You will have card decks in the classroom as well. This is one to watch out for. People or young women love cards, really love cards. So at any one point during the day when you give them 3 minutes free, they will all go for the cards and they will start playing, and you will struggle to get them back. So watch the cards, keep them locked up, or keep them out of their reach, because they will start to play. But the magician activities is really a binary search. There's a way in where you can lay down a card across the desk. You can let anyone make a random choice. I should say beforehand, you should write the letter or the symbol and the number of the card that magically is going to be left at the end. You can put it under the cards, or you can put it inside and cover it up. And then you lay out your cards. You ask somebody from the class to choose a card at random. You then go through a process of elimination, which is really binary search. And then after, it's an algorithm, right? If you go through this process at the end, or this recipe at the end, you will be left with the 8 of hearts in this case, because that's what I chose. What we then did was ask them to try to figure out how it works. That would lead you to demonstrating this technique a few times. I should say as well that you need to practice this. Your TAs need to practice it. It takes a while, meaning that there's a few places in which you can make a mistake, but once you get it, it's pretty straightforward, right? So we asked them to try to figure out how we did it, give them some time to sort of think about it. We then give them the solution, and we ask them to demonstrate. That means that they get a chance to practice it all themselves in the tables around the room, and then we actually hold a competition where each team goes against each other. Considering that there's a lot of places where you can make a mistake, people get nervous and there's suspense and there's some buildup, and so this is a fun thing that we tried. This is what I mentioned about the competition. We then go on to actual binary counting, and this is something that again they enjoyed quite a bit. This is something that some of you might have seen when it comes to t-shirts. And we go through binary counting. What it is, nobody on the rooms or the classrooms that we saw last summer, nobody had seen it. If you've seen it, you probably have one, and it's doubt that they have mastered, they've been exposed to it once. And so you explain, you teach what binary counting is and how to do it, at the end of which we hold an activity. We ask students around the tables again to practice with each other, coming up with a number and representing it with their hand. And then we have a competition. And this is one of the only individual competitions that we do during the class. People come up one-to-one. We give them a number, and then the class can shout out whether it's right or it's not. And typically people make mistakes and change it, but the first person to get it right is the one that stays. The one that loses goes out, and then a new person comes in. So this is a fun exercise to get everybody to participate, and we had a lot of fun doing it. After that, we asked them to create binary clocks. If you haven't done it before, it's a pretty easy thing to do because you can represent numbers with binary, but the question is, how do you do it in a clock? So you do not give them more than that, and you let them try to figure out. You would then move around the tables and give them some hints. And they did, again, much like in the first day, really insightful, really fun, really creative solutions when it came to the clocks. And I can show you here some of the clocks that they came up with. I think there's a couple here that potentially you would have seen. Most of the other ones you would not have. And the creativity really and the explanations that they gave were really wonderful. The confidence as well as to how they worked and how they didn't work. And you can see them working while they're doing these sketches on the board, having those discussions themselves. And so it's pretty, they can move through this pretty fast in the sense that, they go from having a lot of uncertainty and doubt on whether this works or not to really being confident about what they've done and starting to provide, work on the aesthetics and work on the presentation and so on. And so this is an example of something that works really well, where there is a technical element to be mastered, and then there is an opportunity for them to do design and then to think about aesthetics. In the group together, really, it's something that worked really well. So that is Tuesday. Then we will move on to Wednesday. I started out Wednesday with another fun activity. It was, what's the minimum number of guesses to find a number between 1 and x? And I gave them 10, 100, 1,000. And you can see there that it's another opportunity for them to have discussion and to try to figure out how many guesses it would take. There was one person one young girl between all of them that actually was able to derive the right solution on her own, which surprised everybody, including myself. After she put it forward, I had to look at it because she didn't actually do log 2. She actually came up with a formulation, and it was correct. So it was one of those moments of I mentioned again that spark that goes off. The solution is simply log 2 of the number, right, that you're trying to identify. And the thing to explain here is that going from 100 to 1,000 is not that much harder as you might think intuitively from everyday life, right? Or even going to much higher numbers. So this is something that, and I just realized there that I think I made a mistake with that last number because obviously it needs to be bigger than the one before. But the solution is simply log 2 of the number that you're trying to guess. The next activity that we did was encoding information, and I started out by drawing a grid on the board. I then asked them to, at random, select squares on this grid or cells in this grid, and I marked them. After which I'm going to do another one of those of how did Abel do it type of things. After which I add a column and a row, and then I just randomly select columns, and I check columns in that row and that column, and then I go out of the room and I ask them to modify the grid, and then I'll come back and I'll spot where the modification has been made, and I can spot it every time. And the trick is, or the task is, how did I do it? And here I'll explain how I did it. So I add, I say I'm going to add one more just simply to make it much harder. I then seemingly at random add checks on certain rows and in certain places along the row and the column. And the trick, of course, is that I am making them be even on a count. And so when I come back in, I just scan across the board. And if I have an odd number, then I know that that's a row. And then I do the same thing for the columns, and then I can spot it. So in this case, for example, if they had changed this, then you would be able to spot that change. This is something, again, that you could expand to be an activity. You could ask them to compete or not, depending on what you're seeing, right? The other thing as well is, and I did not use this exercise, but I thought about doing ISBN verifications. This is something that appears quite often, or that they might have seen on the back of a book. And so it might be a good way to try to understand whether this is a correct ISBN number, not an existing one, but a valid one. In the end, I decided not to do it because it seemed a little bit too mathy for the activities that we were trying to do. We then moved on to ciphers. Ciphers was one where, because of the way we laid out the competitions, where we had we had ciphers competitions going on all the boards around the whole room. It was a crazy, fun thing that everybody get really connected to. And I start off by the simplest possible hash or cipher that you could do to the word hello. If you look at it long enough, one of the first things that might occur to you is that I'm just giving a numerical value to the location on the alphabet, and that's exactly what I did. You can see here the example that I have. I then, to get them warmed up, and here's I think an opportunity to make a comment in that oftentimes when they do really well in an activity, you will mistakenly assume, oh, they know a lot more than they do, and you will jump forward many steps and lose them. Getting them back, it's really hard. So don't do that, because that's never the case. In this case, I started them off with something very simple, as I said, with just the numerical values for the alphabetical position, and I asked them to come up with the words, right? And so this is one that all of them can move through pretty quickly, and they feel good about it, right? They've gained confidence. I then move on to other ciphers like ROT 13, and this is also a place where you could tell a story about, sending secret messages, and something that someone might want to do even between friends if they are worried about the information being compromised in transit. And again, it opens up itself to some nice stories. And so I do ROT 13, check these encodings here to make sure that they're right. I know there's a mistake in either this one or the next one, at least in one. Then we also showed them rail ciphers. You can see here how that works, and some rail ciphers. So this takes a while. This is something that they enjoy. I think it's something that most people can relate to. The need to encode information in a way that others can't figure out what it is. It's like keeping a secret, yet others can. Those that are in the know can decipher it, right? At the end of the day, after we got through all of this, I brought in binary decision trees. This is something that you could include the day before, or you could leave out depending on how you're doing on time. You can see here that they did a pretty good job when it came to binary decision trees. The applications on the right here had to do with a shopping site. The one on the left had to do with how to choose presents depending on whether you were going to a wedding, a birthday, or St. Valentine's. Both of them really nice ways to think about binary decision trees. Again, we gave them an opportunity to apply it to something of their own choosing. And so this is something that you could do as well. So that was Wednesday. Thursday, I'll say at the outset that it was all about sorting. The girls were engaged in that they participated. This is one that did not work, meaning there was no fire, there was no excitement. And I kept it in and wanted to share it because I think there's a different way to present it. And perhaps some of you can have success with it, or this is a place in where you can bring in additional things that you are thinking of that you think might be exciting, but that so far haven't been part of the lessons. So let me go ahead and move in. I started out by, and if you've worked with search algorithms, you know that a lot of them started out as PhD dissertations, and they have very strong mathematical backgrounds. So had to make them tangible in a physical representation. It's a bit of a challenge. So I thought I would do it with girls lined up end to end. Originally, we were just simply searching for numbers, and we have an unordered search, which people would take guesses at, and there's really no good way of doing it. Then we would compare that again without them knowing with a linear search. Every girl standing in front of the class with an index card with a number that is not revealed, and the class gets to ask questions. This was, as I mentioned, it wasn't really connecting that well. We then moved on to sorting. I asked everyone to line up, the entire class, and then we gave each of them an index card with a number, and then we asked them to sort themselves into order, right? I thought this would be a lot of fun, much like ciphers and other things. It wasn't, so something to think of. I then asked them to create a sorting scheme. This is not a simple thing to do. Again, it wasn't that successful. I then moved on to do bubble sort. I intuitively thought that a long group of girls with numbers in their hands performing the bubble sort algorithm, and seeing one person propagate from the front backwards would be a lot of fun. Again, it wasn't. So this is something to think of, and I kept it in just because I think there is something there that, at least as I, first saw a bubble sort, I thought, oh, that's pretty clever. And then as I started to see others, I thought the same. But maybe it's not either being communicated the right way, or it simply is one that doesn't work that well. We did then the same thing with merge sort, as you can see here, and I even showed the algorithm visualizations on a few websites, and you can see there the different efficiencies between them. I've said it several times already. I'll say it again. That it didn't really land. One of the thoughts that I had, and this was just this week, of how potentially this could be different, was to think of creating a categorization, and then below that an ordering as well, so that as they're trying to sort themselves, there's clustering that's going to happen, and then within that cluster there's an order that needs to occur as well, and that the competition would be to create a sentence that would be formed by the order of the words that appeared within a category. I thought that might lead to a competitive aspect in which the first team to get their sentence read out loud would win. Again, I'll leave it to you to see if that's something that you want to do. We also talked about complexity. In the way in which I illustrated this with the class is with coins. Everybody would flip a coin, and we had a number of I'm thinking of it as in zeros and ones, and that maps to heads or tails, right? But I had a number of zeros that I wanted to get in order at the beginning of the string, if you want to think about it, although it's persons around the room flipping coins. That is another one that didn't work well, in that they went through the coin flipping, and eventually we got the number of zeros that we wanted at the beginning of the string, but they didn't see the point of it. And so this is another one that didn't work. We did not get to traveling salesman, and the reason for that is because I traded off traveling salesman and Towers of Hanoi. You can see here my notes for doing traveling salesman. We have the materials in class, the circles, and the string that they could put between the cities that they're trying to travel to. It is a really important algorithm to have an understanding for. However, after all the tough exercises that we gone through that morning that really hadn't connected, I thought this one might be another one that was a bit too abstract, and so in that it doesn't have that great of a solution, right? If anybody, if anybody, there's even $1 million prize for this, right? So I thought I'd move on to something that was more fun, and we moved on to Towers of Hanoi. And I'll show you here just a little bit of the excitement, suspense that you can see with the teams competing on a video. So as you can see, that worked really well, and they had a lot of fun. And of course, here is a measure of complexity, and you can get into that, and it's a very intuitive connection to how that complexity grows with the number of rings. Friday was pretty much dedicated to presentations. I had scheduled knapsack and a number of activities. This is one that I think connects pretty closely with people because the trade-offs are pretty clear, and also a solution is one that is not straightforward. So this is one that I had planned to cover, but given the pressure that they were in to deliver presentations and the preparations that they still needed to do, I skipped it and we went straight for preparation, followed by presentations, followed by lunch. So that took the entire morning. We also came back after lunch and we had a mentorship session in which you sit down with the girls around the class and they just ask you questions. There's also an opportunity for the TAs, which are computer science students from Mexico, to share with the class their decision process to leading them to choosing being in computer science, some of the experiences. I think for the most part, what you might imagine came to the surface, that really it's a great opportunity and don't mind the numbers. You'll have a lot of fun, and it's exciting to be able to get the job prospects that they now have. As you might know, Google, Oracle, and others are in Mexico. For example, in the city of Monterey, Microsoft itself from Seattle comes down and recruits. Some of the computer science students that were participating in the workshops have had opportunities to go to Pinterest, for example, in Silicon Valley and other places. And so this becomes very real about what you can actually do, how much fun it can actually be. And so the young women in the workshop have an opportunity to have the discussion and opportunity and about how can you prepare and what do you need to do. After that, we wrap up the day. There's a lot of, can I take my picture with you? A lot of teams taking pictures of themselves. Just a lot of fun that is had decompressing after a long week of work. We finish up by about 3 o'clock is in good endpoint. So with that, I'll go ahead and close what is the morning, and I'll switch now to the activities of the afternoon.